This is Judge Joe Brown, and you're watching We All Be News TV, the
News-free Dixie.
news-free Dixie for the 21st century.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you for coming out in full force for this morning session on WGN's The Underground. I am Jessica Millward. I'm an associate professor of history at UC Irvine. I am the chair, commentator, discussing the MC basically for these this morning conversation. I'm telling you up front in the effort of starting late. You're supposed to start on time and end on time. We're starting late and we're ending early. Everyone on the panel has to be at the Association for Black Women Historian Luncheon at noon. And
3 of us are board members, so we kind of need to be on time.
so I will be very harsh with the time limits. Each of the speakers, who are very, very gregarious in their own way, will be given 10 minutes. So
Loquacious.
So my point is made. Our first presenter will go in, well, we're not necessarily going in order of the program. Our first presenter to my right is Jessica Marie Johnson. She's an assistant professor in the Center of Africana Studies in the Department of History at Johns Hopkins University. Her work has appeared in Slavery and Abolition, The Black Scholar, Meridians, Feminisms, Race and Transnationalism, Debates in Digital Humanities, and Black Perspectives. Professor Johnson is a historian of Atlantic slavery in the African diaspora. She is co-editor with Mark Anthony Neal of Black Code, a special issue of Black Scholar, a collection of work exploring the field of Black Code studies, and the author of Practicing Freedom, Black Women, Intimacy, and Kinship in New Orleans, Atlantic World. We'll start with Professor Johnson, and then I will interview each of you. I will interview everyone as they go. So you have 10 minutes.
It's early in the morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wow. It's not that early, but it is early. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Rita Eckert, who was on the panel and who invited me to join you. If you follow me on social media, you know that I have a mild obsession with Underground. I think it's an extremely powerful show, and my remarks are going to be extremely brief. I'm just going to sort of set up where I enter into thinking about the show as a historian of slavery, and particularly as one who's interested in intimacy and kinship and Black women's history, and the show's relationship to those things. So, other direction. So I don't know if everybody remembers this. So this is Angela Peoples, and this is from the Women's March that was in response to the election of Donald Trump. And her friend and partner snapped this just off bat, and as soon as it was posted, it went viral. You can imagine why. But of course, she's interviewed for it, and Angela Peoples is not just a March attendee, although that is an important act for all of us to be involved in, but she's also co-director of Get Equal and has been an organizer for some time. So when she was interviewed, one of the things she said is, one thing I do know, in case, I'm just going to read the beginning of the last piece. One thing I do know is Black women, we've got us. We're continuing to organize our own communities. We're continuing to hold folks accountable across genders and across race. And she says some other things, which I won't read because it's up there. The last thing she says I think is really, really important is to listen to a Black woman. And I think that's really one of the really fascinating things about Underground as a show, is that for all the ways that scholars have talked about resistance and truancy and marronage and all of the ways that people of African descent in slavery in the U.S. And in slavery in the Caribbean and elsewhere around the world, as slavery was of course a global phenomenon, the moves that they've made to abscond from plantations and from their owners, even when there weren't plantations in urban spaces and households, have often still sort of been tinged with a gendered element. They're often seen in the context of enslaved men running away and enslaved men's resistance. And I don't think I have that clip here, and you guys may play it. But one of the very first scene in Underground, the TV show, is Noah running away, and you hear as the overlay Kanye West's Black Skinhead. So there's an interesting, very masculine entrance into the show. Masculine because it's Noah. Aldous Hodge is the character who plays Noah. Because he's running, there's a very ableist physicality to it. Like he's on the move. It seems extremely fast. It's fast. It's fast paced. The cinematography is fast paced. All of that. And of course, there's Kanye, and I'm going to touch on the way the music plays into the show as well. Of course, there's Kanye, who is, an interesting icon of Black masculinity in this particular moment, and that for those of us who grew up in sorry, for those who grew up with this music, and that masculinity has changed in really interesting ways. We can talk about like old Kanye versus like blonde Kanye.
Kardashian.
But still, like, and so thinking of Black Skinhead as part of that. And so there is that entrance in the show, but once you get into it, and once you start following the characters, a whole world and spectrum of resistance opens up in some really fascinating ways. One of the most interesting characters, I think, and all of them are really complex, rich characters, is Miss Ernestine. And Miss Ernestine is one of the main figures from the very beginning, from the very first season. She is she runs the house on Making Plantation, and she is also sort of the mother. Matriarch is a word is tinged with many things, but she is the mother of one of the other main characters, Rosalie, her son Sam, and she has another son as well, a younger child. And so through her, we begin to see all kinds of really interesting things about what does it mean to portray that position, a very fraught position. We know that through work from the panels here, we know through work by Devolia Glimpse in particular, out of the house of bondage, that experience of being in the household as an enslaved person. Many of them were women, but many were also children, and some were men. In the household was a dangerous space, and dangerous because of the ways that the violence could be incidental. So I'm going to play a scene here from season 1, but I don't have the scene, so I'll just explain it from season 2. This is going to be full of spoilers, so I'm sorry.
If you've not seen it.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, so the scene from season 2 where over the course of the 2 seasons, Rosalie becomes pregnant. She is in the household where she was originally enslaved. She'd run away and she'd come back, and they caught her and she's 7 or 8 months along, so she's visibly pregnant. And what you see is Miss Susanna, who is Macon's wife, so she's the plantation mistress essentially, is upset at Rosalie for something she's done, basically for standing there in the room in the parlor near the piano, and she slaps 1, 2, 3 times in a row another attendant, another woman, enslaved woman who is attending her, because she doesn't want to slap Rosalie, because Rosalie is pregnant with her property. Now, all of this is not necessarily laid out, but it's there, and I wish I could have gotten that clip. That's the kind of violence that we're talking about in the household. And I just want to really stress that, not only because Dr. Glimp's work and again everybody's work is so important in changing how we think about household violence, but because still in this moment, the kind of political rhetoric around who is house, whatever, and who is in the field, it's still gendered, it's still fraught, and still truncates the way that we need to think about our politics and about the spectrum of resistance. So that's season 2. This is the very first episode of season 1, and hopefully it will play okay.
You see what you've done?
Rosalie, go down there and tell my son to come inside.
I'll go, Miss Susanna.
Quickly now, Rosalie.
Look what you've done! does. Pull him out!
Mr. Bill, Miss Susanna wants Mr. T.R. and James to go back up on that porch with us.
What's gonna pay for wasting my time? Pull him out!
It's my fault. It's my fault, Mr. Bill. It's my fault. I gave him the sugar. It's got him running wild. If anybody gonna be punished, it's gonna be me.
So that's how they do it up in the big house, is it? You just talk to me anywhere you want.
No, no, sir.
Come down here and tell me how it's gonna be!
No, no, sir. Little boys. Little boys.
So this is all within maybe the first 20 minutes of the first episode. And so what is great about, what I think is important, not great of course, but what I think is important about Underground are the ways that it doesn't shy away from violence. It doesn't necessarily make a spectacle of it. There's a way that with the music, with the range of the camera, with who it focuses on, and so it'll zero in a little bit on Ernestine here. And it gives you that wide lens of both the racial terror that enslaved people were undergoing, and it does a similar thing with the ways that resistance is portrayed in the show. This is another one, just to, I'm just trying to set up here. I'll play it and see if I try to remember how much you know. For those who have not necessarily seen all of the episodes.
I know you felt some coldness between us over the years. I want you to know it's not because you were laying with my husband. We all had our dalliances with your kind. There was a stable boy who worked the horses when I was Mary's age. And it's not because you bore our husband's children. That's nothing more than free labor. But my children, they were the one thing I was promised would be mine. And they look to you as if you're their mother. When they laugh, it's with you. When they cry, they call out for Steve. I've waited a long time to repay that kindness. And now that Tom is gone, there's nothing stopping me. From putting you on the block. Don't worry about James. I'm gonna bring him back in the house. Raised in his mom. Give him a better life than you ever could.
So what's great about the ways that the show is able to kind of delve into the exterior terror, as well as, so I kind of snatched this from my computer, the interior of dynamics between white women and enslaved women within the plantation context, within the enslaved society, between into the kinds of terror that are being enacted in the household itself. It makes legible all these different layers, right? So it makes bondage about more than labor, even though that is crucial. It makes bondage about more even than the beatings. It's about all of these levels. The kind of power that Miss Susanna has to sell Ernestine. Ernestine knew that, but that last piece about, oh, now your son is mine. So there's a way that motherhood also plays a really particular and important role in the kinds of violence that is engaged in, the kinds of, the levels of containment that enslaved people of color were subject to, and the knowledge that slave owners had of what they could do. And the kind of small spaces that enslaved people took back for themselves, the way that they tried to reimagine and reorient the plantation space, the enslaved spaces that are around them. I keep saying plantation, and we should note that's of course not the only space, but this is sort of, first season sort of based on the Macon plantation, so it fits in this context. The way that enslaved people took time where they could to kind of understand their world in a different way, to take the space they could. So there is a scene in earlier in season 1 that is it's like the second or third episode. I think it's the third, where Rosalie finds at the very beginning of the episode finds a yellow ribbon. That some of the other women in the house, they're talking about parties going to happen later. She grabs this yellow ribbon. The yellow ribbon later on becomes a target when she has to go serve brandy to her father and owner and a group of men who are gathered for a political thing. So she gets sexually harassed basically because of that yellow ribbon. But then later on, she meets up with Noah. She decides to defect from the house, go to this party. Not necessarily with permission, although she's Ernestine's daughter, so she has kind of interesting space within the relationships in the household. And the ribbon is one of the first things Noah touches and says, you know, like, you look beautiful and all those kinds of things. So even in the play that is engaged in, there's a level of danger. But that doesn't mean that it's like people didn't play. It doesn't mean that they didn't take space for themselves and time to kind of reimagine their circumstances. And so this is also from, we're jumping around in time in the season, which is a no-no, but this is also from the first episode, and I wanted to leave it because it's Ernestine and Rosalie talking and trying to think about, you know, their world, you know, theorizing literally their world.
I'm picking my fingers bloody out in them cotton fields, or being put up on that block, sold away from my children, maybe deep south to a breeding farm, where they forced me to have a dozen babies I'd never get to hold. And like I held you. Oh yes. I've imagined thousands of different lives. Which is why I work as hard as I do to make sure this one here is as easy as it can be.
So the only thing I will add there is that right before, the question that Ernestine as a mother is answering in Rosalie is Rosalie saying, do you ever imagine different worlds? And so this is, like when we think of like what we can't find in the archive, and what we wish we could find, it's these kinds of moments that we know are happening between mothers and daughters, the touches on the cheek, the quiet resistance there, even in, okay, I'm gonna be here, but I'm gonna make space here where I can. Like these are important moments, and they're ephemeral in the archive, but Underground lets us actually visualize them and engage with them in a very real way. So thank you.
So thank you, Professor Johnson. Our next speaker is Professor Emerita Chakwari Myers. Professor Myers earned her doctorate degree in U.S. history from Rutgers University, specializing in African American history and women's history. A historian of the Black female experience, her work examines ideas about race, gender, sexuality, power, and freedom. Dr. Myers has given me a long bio. I'm going to try and truncate parts of it. Hold on. You must get your recognition. Dr. Myers has been the recipient of several awards, including a 2017 fellowship from the American Council of Learned Societies, the 2012 Phyllis Wheatley Book Prize from the Northeast Black Studies Association, the 2012 Julia Cherry Sprill Book Prize, the Anna Julia Cooper Book Prize, the George C. Rogers Book Prize, and finally the Letitia Woods Brown Article Prize from the Association of Black Women Historians. Dr. Myers' first book, Forging Freedom, Black Women and the Pursuit of Liberty in Charleston, was published in 2011, and that was the award-winning book that I just referred to. Dr. Myers is currently on leave at the James Weldon Johnson Institute at Emory University and is writing her second book, Remembering Julia, A Tale of Sex, Race, Power, and Place. Dr. Myers is the Ruth Ann Halls Associate Professor of History and Gender Studies at Indiana University. Sorry, when you live in the Midwest, you just truncate it all. Sorry. Indiana University.
Thank you, Dr. Millward. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. There are some empty chairs in the front for folks who are standing so that you don't have to stand unless you really want to. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's a very full program and there's so many sessions running at the same time, so we appreciate you being here with us this morning. As you've already seen from Dr. Johnson's presentation, Underground is a show that has incredibly powerful characters, powerful white and black characters, powerful enslaved characters, powerful free characters, but for me, one of the things that I picked up on instantly, and I guess maybe because of the work that I do on slavery in the South, is the powerful female characters in particular. And it actually really kind of resets the stage in a lot of ways for how people in America think about or talk about enslaved persons. Because despite the fact that the field of Black women's history is arguably one of the most vibrant, right now in terms of the books and articles that are being published, the dissertations being completed, we still, in the general media and general imagination, slavery is still seen in a very particular way, and the slave person is still seen as the default male character. And to have these incredibly strong female characters, black and white, on both sides, portraying all of these incredible roles, right? That this is a really raw show, right? It's very realistic. And I think that might be part of why the show went 2 seasons and then was canceled and not picked up even by Oprah and the OWN network. I believe Oprah made a comment, we were talking about this morning, that, she just couldn't pick up Underground. And I'm like,
She said she could not save.
She could not save Underground. I'm like, are you? Yeah, I had a moment when I heard that particular phrase. But I mean, this is a show, if you haven't seen it, that this is not a pretty picture, right? This is a slavery that we know of from reading Thavolia Glimp, from reading Deborah Gray White, from reading the reality, right, of beatings, of sexual assault, of murdering your own children, right, of interracial sex. Right, hoping to be able to trade that for a better life for your children, right? About power, about substance abuse, about the reality and ugliness of slave catchers, right? Christopher Maloney, who was long on Law and Order SVU, plays like the slave catcher, and his character. I mean, okay, no one comes off looking 100% good in this show, but that's what's so wonderful about it, is that it is real. The characters are human, they are flawed, they are whole, they are not one-dimensional in any way, shape, or form. So as much as you have this real dislike for Christopher Maloney's character, the slave catcher, you see his incredibly mentally damaged wife who's in the insane asylum. Yeah, right. You see Cato, the duplicitous, traitorous slave, right? You see Susanna Macon, the incredibly vicious white wife, in that clip that we just saw that Dr. Johnson played for us. One of the things that I think is important to note that clip didn't refer to is that the hatred that she has for Ernestine goes well beyond what we just saw, because she refers in one small sentence, if you didn't pick up on it, that Ernestine and her actually are half-sisters, right? Her father was Ernestine's father. They grew up together. They knew they were half-sisters. And then she grows up not only with this woman who's her half-sister begins sleeping with her husband and producing these children like James and Rosalie, who are therefore not only her husband's children, but also her nieces and nephews. So when she says that she's going to take James back into the house, I mean, the layers that we're seeing here, like the multiplicity of violence, right, of rhetorical and physical violence is powerful. And I will just play a couple of clips, but I'm just thinking of the amazing characters. So we have Rosalie, who goes from being this really prim, proper, attired house staff, woman, to being this incredible, like, rebel apprentice to Harriet, right, Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Tubman, pardon me, I was thinking of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl.
It isn't necessarily incorrect. But
No, right. She apprenticed to, Harriet Tubman and kind of becoming like an assistant Moses, like, running on the underground. Ernestine, who goes from being the head of the household to, in season 2, being a field slave in the Deep South and a substance abuse addict. Right, the changes that these women go through from season 1 to season 2 are striking. Elizabeth, a northern white woman who begins sort of like this sad character with a sad marriage, she can't have children, and her husband become active in the Underground Railroad, and even after her husband is killed, she actually becomes, she is badass. We're talking like gun-toting, setting stuff on fire. It's like something in her has broken when her husband is taken from her, and she just, she becomes this warrior, feminist, white woman, abolitionist. Georgia, who's actually one of the women who runs like the whole crew of women who are working for the Underground Railroad. And you don't know until several episodes in that Georgia's actually passing. She's a light-skinned black woman who's a runaway, and she's now passing as a white woman, and now is literally in charge of all of these women, white and black, who are working on the railroad and helping enslaved people to escape. So to me, it's like all of these incredibly powerful female characters. Patty Cannon, white female slave catcher, right? The counterpart to Christopher Maloney's character. And her whole mission in life, she's known as like the best slave catcher in America. She has the largest number of catches and kills, the largest bounties, but the one prize she's never been able to capture, Harriet Tubman. And her whole mission is to capture Harriet Tubman in order to make her mark in America. She's got a biographer following her around, taking notes on everything she does and says, because she wants to go down in history as the woman who caught Moses, right? None of these women are the one-dimensional women from slave stories of old, right? Full, whole, flawed. Sometimes you love them, sometimes you hate them, sometimes you love to hate them. They're amazing. But I also wonder if this may not be part of why the show died after 2 seasons. Is anybody really ready to see this cast of characters? White and black, mostly women, strong, powerful, flawed, having sex, in order to make a way where there is no way? Are they ready to face that reality? I don't think they were. That's my thing. Was it just the brutality in general? Is it the fabulous, powerful black characters, including the male characters like Noah? I'm still going to lean on the fact that I think that what happens with women like Rosalie and Ernestine and others is just not comfortable for the American viewing audience. So I want to show you just a couple of clips, and then I'm going to stop because what we want is to have dialogue, because there's so much to unpack. That's my very cute dog, by the way. If you haven't met Shiloh, let me just say. So a couple of clips that I would like for us to look at. This is Harriet Tubman. And if you've seen this show, there's an entire episode where it's literally just her, it's a monologue. I can only show you a couple of super, super short clips, but if you haven't seen that episode, you really need to see that episode.
The more he said the word to me,
So,
the more sense it made. Slavery ain't just a sin, it's a state of war. Profiting off the bodies of others. Raping the bodies of others, killing the bodies of others. Those are all acts of war, been that way since the dawn of man. And we ain't been calling it that because there's a nationwide conspiracy working against us. A conspiracy, as the captain called it, of slaveholders actively at war, working hard to make it seem a way of things. They pass it on to their sons and daughters. They strengthen it through government. They justify it through religion, calling it Christianity. That ain't my Christianity. Calling it God's will, that ain't my God.
Yeah. Wow. That's Alicia Hines as Harriet Tubman, and all I have to say to you is, wow, she's amazing. She's amazing. There's another clip with her that I would like you to see. It's from this same monologue, but it's the end of the monologue. And pay very close attention to her language in this end scene.
If you don't have it in you to take up arms against the injustice, then you gotta pray another prayer. And you gotta walk in it with conviction. He will provide, but you gotta do your part. You gotta find what it means for you to be a soldier. Beat back those that are trying to kill everything good and right in the world and call it making it great again. We can't vote just citizens in a time. That'll be surrender. That'll be giving up our future and our souls. Ain't nobody get to sit this one out, you hear me?
Y'all picked up on that. You know, I found her language very interesting. I'm like, she wasn't just talking about the 19th century. All right, I only have one more clip, and then I'm going to be wrapped up with time to spare, if I'm not mistaken. Because I want to show you one clip of Rosalie. The clips that Dr. Johnson shows you about Rosalie are mostly Rosalie from season 1, where she's very properly attired and, the house slave, quote unquote. I want you to see Rosalie from season 2. Just a little bit of Rosalie from season 2. This is one of to me the most powerful clips from season 2, and so. She's been shot. And what we would find out at the end of that, so here she is, she's in the process of running away, she's trying to, she's been shot, she has to take care of herself medically, but what also we see at the end of that is when she finally takes off all of her clothes is that she's 8 months pregnant, right? So she's putting everything on the line to make sure that she can get back to her family. She's willing to risk everything to go back south to, help her own family find freedom. Right? She's lost Noah at this point. She doesn't even know if he's dead or alive or where he is. But she's like, I'm willing to run through the woods, get chased by dogs and slave catchers, get shot, and everything else that I'm going through, carrying this baby, because my family means everything to me. And that family is not just this child I'm carrying, but it's my brother James, it's my mother Ernestine. I will not be happy in freedom unless I have my family, my whole family reunited with me. And to me, it was so powerful on a number of levels because it also took me back to Terra Hunters to join my freedom. And the critical aspect of how do you define freedom for yourself? And for enslaved and formerly enslaved people, first and foremost, what did they do? They went to find the family members that they had been torn apart from, right? And so every episode that I saw, it was the back and forth between the reality of studying slavery and what I was seeing on the screen. It made me glad to see it, but I also think that this is why we didn't see more of it. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to turn things over back to our fabulous moderator. Thank you for your attention.
as we've been moving through these papers and these comments, it's quite interesting in the way that the conversation is developed in terms of a scholar of slavery and freedom to the scholar of freedom, right? So we have the enslavement, we have movements to freedom, and then if you follow Underground, and spoiler alert, the last episode of the show does end the way Amrita says, with this vision of a hope for this new child, bringing a child into the world, hopefully in a better place. So it's no accident that our next speaker, Dr. Deidre Cooper Owens, who is the resident expert on reproduction and gynecology in African American women, will end this panel. So Dr. Cooper...
No, Dr. Cooper Owens' book just dropped.
So in case you didn't know. So Deidre Cooper Owens is an assistant professor of history at Queens College, CUNY. She won a number of prestigious honors that range from the University of Virginia's Carter G. Woodson Postdoctoral Fellowship in the Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies to serving as an American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology Fellow. Dr. Cooper Owens received her PhD from the very rigorous but wonderful history department from UCLA, where she wrote an award-winning dissertation. Her early educational training is rooted in the liberal arts tradition of HBCUs, where she graduated from Bennett College and received her MA in African American Studies from Clark Atlanta University. Dr. Cooper Owens has published essays, book chapters, and popular blog pieces on a number of issues that concern African American experiences. As I have already said, her recently published book, Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and the Origins of American Gynecology, is part of the University of Georgia Press Race in the Atlantic World series. I will also say, that this is off script, that Dr. Cooper Owens in some ways birthed this term toxic masculinity in one of her blog pieces, and actually as I was in the lobby yesterday, someone tried to throw that at me as, you know, as I said feminist, because this person didn't have the name tag that said feminist. They then threw toxic masculinity. So the men's are upset with this term, and I want to congratulate you. The men's of Asala are upset, and I say good job. Oh my! I say good job. So with that, we'll turn it to Jennifer.
Thank you all so much. I'm not trying to get shanked.
I got you.
There's a story where my knife was confiscated at the Atlanta airport last night. So anyway, thank you all for being here. And I am not going to use any visuals. But let me just say, I taught a course last semester called Slavery in Hollywood, where we dealt with how people learn about slavery. And most of us, as we know, learn about slavery from TV and from movies. Exactly. And so I viewed Underground with a different set of eyes than I normally would have. And so the strengths of the show, and so I'm first going to start from the technical aspects and then what I really think the show is about. The strengths are its precision and its accuracy and its depiction. It really is visual reproduction of the plantation. So you understand the architecture, the landscape, the inner workings of the house, right? And that in slavery, there is nothing really ever underground. But its weaknesses, as powerful as it was and is that I think sometimes the episodes can drag. They're often trying to do a little too much. And so particularly for the first episode, I remember just saying, well, what the heck? Watch my language here, but a young lady. What the heck are they doing here? I mean, my God, you're learning Negro spirituals and freedom maps, and you're dealing with the issues of the kind of mixed race house servants against the darker skinned field slaves. Also the age-old questions that are being wrought by the Hawks / Macon brothers. But also, you also are dealing with these notions of the quasi-fragility of the supposed innately hypersexual nature of mixed race women. So there's much to tease out about a show that is as much about fugitivity and freedom as it is about slavery. And that, picking up on what Dr. Myers just said, that really what lies with the continuation of slavery as a profitable institution is the Black woman carrying a Black child, right? That has its status based on its mother's status as a bondwoman. But what I think is equally important, particularly there is a very touching scene. Noah is angry at Rosalie for the harm that she possibly causes to their unborn child. But it's this wonderful soliloquy where he talks about the ways that Black parents hope for and wish for their children to inhabit and to inherit a world, right, where they can be imagined as fully thought out and fleshed out three-dimensional people. And so that was very important for me. So now I'll put on the professorial hat and try and theorize here. So what kinds of practices create possibilities for new Africanist futures? Is one of the questions that I grappled with when looking at underground. How do our everyday engagements with power complicate how we understand Black struggle? So what I hope for us to do is to really think about hapticity, right? The ways in which things are handled, manipulated. And we're talking in terms of these characters, these TV characters, right? How does our understanding of the senses, and I'm talking about everything from touch, sight, taste, how do our understandings of the senses within slavery studies, right, as a conception of practice, allows us to think beyond conventional notions of resistance as the primary model for understanding the relationship of marginalized subjects to power? By focusing on the theme of fugitivity, and really fugitivity is about, to borrow a term that's in vogue, Afrofuturism, right, because it is an imagining of what could be when you flee. I explore the quotidian practices of Black subjects whose micro-labors of struggle are frequently overlooked in an emphasis on collective and individual acts of resistance. And as Saidiya Hartman noted, in Scenes of Subjectivity, life after slavery simply becomes about the different modes of subjection and not freedom. And so we see what freedom, or really quasi-freedom, means for Black people who have escaped North. That they're always in fear of going back into bondage, but also trying to embody freedom in a space where it was only meant for white people and property owners and men. And so what that means when you are Black and you are living literally in a country that never regarded you as anything but a laborer, right? So the transition from slavery to freedom becomes a farce, or incomplete, because life for African Americans is really only a little better than slavery and not true freedom. So the concept of fugitivity or taking flight emerges as a signature idiom of Black diasporic culture, and really a meaningful pathway for realizing the aspirations of futurity, articulated, I think, as both Professors Johnson and Myers stated, are really looking at Black feminist theory, Afrofuturism, and I am introducing the haptic, really understanding the ways that senses matter in our understandings of it. And it's something that historians really haven't taken up. And I am, in a few of my talks, really issuing a call for us to do so. The History of Business is doing, and I attended a conference in Harvard this summer where I was the only historian of slavery. Everybody else was a historian of either business or capitalism, and they are very interested in the ways in which we think about how others consume products, right? And so to think about people who are then later turned into products, who are once again trying to issue a call that there are people, and they're doing this by running, by breathing, by tasting, and they're even using these as the metaphors for how to inhabit and live in freedom. And so I think that's really important. So I'm going to end all of the theory talk with just this one last sentence. Accessing a haptic visuality allows, I think, all of us as scholars and those interested in understanding the past in this way is to use our eyes like organs of touch, right? Much like masters, slaves, overseers, and patty rollers treated each other, particularly as that plays out with Underground. And so let me just say that I consider myself a connoisseur of blaxploitation films. There is probably not one that I have not seen. I promise you. I promise you. And I was often intrigued by the ways that the writers and directors integrated the plot points from films like Mandingo. I mean, the fact that Ernestine hangs her owner / lover, baby daddy, right? I mean, hangs him with this soliloquy that is just like Cicero essentially saying, kiss my ass in Mandingo, right? To think about Django and the ways that Cato in some ways inhabits that space, right? That Django is not trying to free black folk, he's just trying to get his woman, right? And so Cato in the very same way inhabits that, but I think what they do in a very smart way that Quentin Tarantino needs to learn, right, is that you don't necessarily have to rely on lazy tropes and that you can give these people dimension. And so I'll end this with a few questions, right, for us to ponder. In what ways does this show as a representation of a living museum reproduce trauma for black people whose ancestors were subjected to slavery, right? How do we feel, right, when we watch this show? What physiological responses are we experiencing when we ingest these kinds of images about our people, right? But also, what can a restaging of slavery teach us about power, empathy, history, and memory? So I will stop here. Thank you.
So I would like to thank all of the panelists. We are going to open it up for questions, but I'm going to use my purview of the chair, moderator, discussant, and panelists to say just one thing, and that is we are in this moment, right, where we're still questioning if Black Lives Matters, right? I mean, we know it does. And again, to borrow from memory, I don't think it's an accident the show was canceled. I do have questions about Oprah. I follow the thread. If Oprah Winfrey and the OWN network cannot rescue Underground, I don't know what to say. I've watched the OWN network. I see what she produces. And so I have questions. Yes. I have questions. Yes, I watch all the soap operas on the OWN network. So not to make light of the subject, right? I use Underground in my class on comparative slave rebellions. And in the last 5 years, I've had to change comparative slave rebellions to have readings such as C.L.R. James and the classics, and pose it with some of the wonderful blogs that are being produced by scholars, by women of color, black women, in this moment where Black Lives Matter. So my question to the panelists would be, if we can talk about the politicization, not just of slavery in a particular way, but the way in which Black Lives Matter in this show. You can answer it now or later, but we'll open it up. You want to open it up or you want to? Let's open it up. Let's open it up. Oh. Okay, we'll go to the nice woman in the pink, then we'll move to Professor Patterson. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure.
And then
I'm
Dr.
Dr.
Jason on the floor.
I am an unrepentant, unredeemable fan of this series, short-lived series. Yet, one of, if not the first, perhaps the second episode, I was so turned off and almost considered not continuing to watch. And I'm speaking of the wine cellar.
Oh, I knew exactly where you were going.
With Ernestine, who of course we realized much later had more dimension.
Yes.
But I can't forget that. And I have questioned ever since the intention and really purpose of that scene. What's your interpretation or reading of that, either with the directors, the writers, who did that, who it really served?
I don't want to be, it's open to the panel.
Yeah, I think I'll try to answer because it's a hard scene, and what she's talking about, I am going to just give a spoiler. It's all about S&M, right? And so Ernestine as the lead house slave, but also the and I use this in quotes, the lover
Yes.
of Master Macon, is in the scene where she essentially becomes the dominatrix.
Right.
So she becomes the master and he becomes the slave. But I think in a very, and I can't stand this man, but I think Hegel is right here, right? That the master is much, the master needs the slave, right? The slave doesn't need the master. And so I think that there is this playing upon of the mixed woman as, once again, innately hypersexual, right? That the burden of beauty and seduction and sensuality falls on her shoulders because of this curse of whiteness. But also to show that he performs a certain kind of masculinity. And so he literally has to go underground to the wine cellar, right, in order for him to show fragility, for him to be able to give up his power to this black woman. And so for me, I really think it was about scintillating the audience. Because it was not a scene that was necessarily teased out in the ways that it could have been. And they played with, I think, the romance and the seduction between black characters in a much more honest way and fleshed out way. And so it only was pleasurable for Macon, we later learn, right? I mean, that Ernestine is playing a role. She is, and this is where the integration of the Harriet Jacobs comes in, where she is essentially using this white powerful man to make sure that her children are protected.
I would, I'm sorry. I would actually also add on to that that scene was very hard to watch for a whole host of reasons. I was expecting that something like that scene was coming though, just given my work and what I've done already with this work. But to me, I actually have to set that scene. I think it sets the stage for many things that come later on in the season. And so looking back on it now, I understand much of what was being set up for us, because you think at first that you're seeing, oh, it's the tired old trope of the mulatto head of the household having sex with the slave owner. So we're talking about power dynamics, right? And I'm thinking about what happens later, more spoilers, sorry. Ernestine has 3 children, right? Her oldest son is actually the son of the man that she loved, right? Who she was married to, who she considers to be her husband. And who is now deceased. And then Rosalie and James are the products of this sexual relationship with the master, right, Macon. And she's always angling to try to protect her children, right, from James to Rosalie, but even to her older son Sam, I believe was, yeah. And she has fooled herself into believing that she's been able to build enough of a hedge of protection around them that even Sam perhaps is protected, even though he's not the master's son, that because of Macon's obsession with her and desire for her, that he will also be protected should it come down to things, right? But when it comes down to have to performing his masculinity, right, Macon's running for political office. And the white men in his district find him suspect. They don't think that he's really master-ish enough. He's a northerner. He's a northerner originally. He's a transplant. He married this southern woman. Is he really a slave master? Is he really a real man? Is he a real southern slave master man? There's a lot of insinuations that he's just not really tough enough, made of the right stuff, and he has to prove himself to get their endorsements and their votes. And how does he do that? He kills Sam. He hangs him in a scene that is straight out of a Reconstruction Triple K lynching.
And has her thrown into the hole.
It is ugly, it is vicious, it is violent. And then we see the same thing played out when Ernestine hangs his behind and does to him what he had done to her son. And so to me, when I have to put all of these scenes together and be able to understand that when we're seeing the role reversal of power and the power play between these two characters and the constant vying for domination, the desire to be seen as masculine, the performance of sexuality, I was like, okay, I can now deal with the scene in the cellar in a way that I had a hard time with it in the beginning. Yeah.
I love that scene. I think that's probably one of my favorite scenes across the 2 seasons. And not for necessarily what is in it, but for the work that it does on close reading, for the ways that we think about intimate violence and intimate practices during bondage. And so Dr. Myers has set up what happens after that scene. Let's put that in context. Remember what I was saying about the yellow ribbon and how Rosalie goes in and basically gets sexually harassed, really assaulted because the man's hands are all over her. In a scene where Macon is basically kind of feting and trying to curry political favor for this very run that ends up with Sam's hanging. Rosalie goes into that room. The only way she gets out of that room is when Ernestine comes in and says, "Did you want that wine that you asked for? Is it time for us to serve your guests?" That's not the exact line, but she basically interrupts a moment of violence to save her daughter. And that's what the next scene is. It pulls Macon into the cellar. And so this relationship, this intimate interaction that they have, it's not quite a relationship in the way that we think about relationships. It is ongoing. So then we ask us a question like, what are relationships? What is a bond? What is kinship? What is family? But that interaction, that relation that Macon and Ernestine have is bookmarked, bookended by her children and what she is doing to protect her children. But even in that, there is something very, I think, important about that scene, the way that it's shot and the way it's set up, the extent to which she is she is the dom in this scene. And so it asks us to think about Black kink, BDSM, how that interfaces with bondage, how that has interfaced with the things that we find pleasurable even today, how that it might have interfaced at that time period with what people found desirable, what was titillating to them. Because there's things like that kind of pop up throughout the season. And it asks us to think differently about what sex acts are. Oh, there's a baby in the room, I forgot. Soaking it all in. She's coming. Miss Layla is young enough that we can still get a baby. And it makes us think differently about pleasure, but it does require close reading because just following Ernestine's face in that scene, you find the whole gamut of emotion. And there is Mira Bond is a phenomenal actress. There is in the play of her acting moments of pleasure, and then there are also moments of I cannot believe I have to do this again. There are moments of this is clearly an act of violence. I am uncomfortable. I hope Sam gets out of this. I hope James gets out. Like there's so much there, and it's a minute and a half. It's not a long scene.
You can see. I look at that expression on her face and I'm like, okay, I'm having sex with this man right now to make sure that nobody was going to be assaulting my daughter.
Absolutely.
Like one sex scene being traded for another.
But it's also about, submission. It's the power of having someone submit to you even though you don't have real power, right?
Yeah.
That's why you need to. And when I watched that scene, I watched it through the lens of Black.
And reminding him.
That's phenomenal.
Like reminding
Let
him.
me instill some order.
It's layers.
Okay, dark side of the
sorry.
Thank you for that though.
We have, this is what I have from my eyes.
Yes.
Thank you. Professor Patterson, Professor Young, and the gentleman in the front.
Yes.
And then we'll come, if we have time, to the ladies in the back. Sorry.
Very quickly, I want to answer the question about Oprah.
Please.
Oprah's a comprador. For those of you that may not know the term, it's an older term from Latin American studies. I'm a couple generations back when we were looking at development and underdevelopment. Comprador means for those of the oppressed who rise to positions of power and appear to be still part of the group that they came from, but they no longer are. Oprah could have saved that film on 2 levels. First of all, she could have saved it from the network that was going to cancel it because she owns a network. Secondly, she could have altered some of the direction if she deemed it necessary. Of course, I wouldn't want her to do it, but in terms of if she had the consciousness to do it and keep the integrity of the film, of the series going. And I think we're still reluctant in the 21st century to critique Black people in class terms, in terms of what they do and what they do with their class and their money. And I think that has to become part of our scholarly work, even as it relates to slavery. The second thing I want to say, and I'll do it quickly because there are others who want to speak. the question as to the reaction to the film, there were many black people who don't want to watch anything on slavery.
Right. That's right.
It's
too traumatic.
I was at a dinner party with some people from the medical school and from our education school. I'm in humanities, and I teach slavery, and I brought it up. And the doctor said to me quite angrily, I don't want nothing about it. I don't care. I'm sorry, but I don't want to know anything about it. And my only response to him was, if they can live it, you can watch it. And I said, one last thing. Teaching this to students who know nothing about it is also, and I say this with great seriousness, this is not a critique of anyone, it requires us to deal with it before we teach the students. Okay? So they have not, I'm going to be, when I teach slavery again, I'll be using Underground.
Oh, yeah.
But before that, I used Marlon James's book, A Night Women, in our freshman class. And we did it for 2 years, and I used it in my slavery class. Yes, my students cried. Yes, my black male students said, I don't want to talk to no more white people.
Right.
Yes, my white girl from Connecticut called me on the phone over the break crying on the phone. Why didn't somebody tell me? I didn't know this. Why didn't somebody tell me? Are we going to talk about it? Yes, all of these things happens. But as scholars and teachers, we have to be able to speak to the head and the heart. And
responsibility.
it's our responsibility. And slavery was an ugly, vicious, violent institution. There was nothing romantic about it. And so we have to be prepared as teachers to take up those concerns. The sexuality, and Book of Night Women, if you haven't read it, is a hard book to read. And so especially in terms of the sexual violence that black women experience. So I just wanted to put those points on the table, and I agree with what the panel, what all of you are saying about the film in terms of what's happening, and particularly that scene. I love that scene. I just have to say that. I love when Ernestine hung that SOB. Okay.
So I don't believe that requires a response. I don't. We're gonna go to Dr. Young, and I'm going to remind, if you came in late, we actually had to end this panel very early in respect for the ABWH luncheon. So we are going to have to cut some conversation short. That means the panelists are going to cut some of their remarks short. Professor Young.
Thank you. This is actually a question that builds off the last. So there's been a lot of conversation about the cancellation of this show and this idea that that people weren't ready to watch. But it seems to me that that's not a full answer. No. Only because the show was really successful and it was one of the most successful shows on the network. Yes. So if this were a really good show that people happened not to watch because they weren't ready and it got canceled, well then that's how capitalism goes. That would be a perfectly acceptable conclusion to a show. Other shows have experienced a similar fate. But it seems to me that in making the argument that people weren't ready to watch this show, we're talking about actually a very small number of people. Right. We're talking about a boardroom in which a conversation happens. And so I wonder if folks on the panel or if in the larger room have anything to say about the corporate decision, about the very specific corporate decision that went into canceling the show. Not the idea that there's a kind of hazy unreadiness for shows like this, but that there was a real conversation in a room on a day. It was an agenda item at a certain point. And so I just wonder if people have anything to say about that particularly.
Can I jump on something really quick? Because one of the things that I was thinking about is at the same time, Handmaid's Tale. And it's about women being raped and treated like, and the acclaim around that is totally different. So to me, it's also about, well, who's suffering, what women are suffering, and who's being subjected to bondage. And so, and they decided to go with Hulu, right? Because they didn't want to deal with
and they won 8 Emmys.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just, but you get what my point is.
Like absolutely.
It is about who is being who's doing the suffering.
Right. The short answer is yes, we know this and we've seen this before. And the short answer is we have this new administration. And networks also follow the new administration, right?
Right.
And they capitulate to the new administration as much as they're supposed to be unbiased. Do you want to comment on this?
I do, because this is actually a really, there's actually an answer to this It's not yeah, so like WGN America was acquired by a different media group.
Right.
It was acquired by the
Right.
Sinclair Media Group, I think. And that is, and they're deliberately making a move to be the next Fox News.
Yeah.
So it was not just that we don't, yeah, like they've cut
And
all
local
kinds of
programming.
progressive and liberal programming, because what they want it to be is the next sort of Fox Talk News, very conservative network. Because they're upset that Fox News isn't conservative enough because now we're in Trump's America. So they cut underground in that kind of context. Handmaid's Tale is produced by Amazon or Hulu. And so it, you know, like, and there is a thing there where it's like, you know, like certainly certain bodies are acceptable. And so all of this is also true, but this is also a really clear case of they do not want this show on there because it, along with other shows, does not fit the more conservative ethos that they want to go towards. And so there's questions of, it doesn't change Oprah's response necessarily because she still owns a network, right? So we would think about who owns things, who has power, and who can cut, and the media conglomerate. But this is a nice case of like, we actually know who the villain is.
Right.
And we could hold them accountable. The other part is that Underground was successful in a lot of really great ways, and it did have a broad reach and a broad viewership. And it was also limited other ways. Like it was only, like it wasn't streaming necessarily, you know, so there's a certain kind of audience that it could have, and it wasn't, you know, the ways that shows are available. I mean, it has its own drawbacks, but even with that, it was still, it was more successful than you think even they expected it to. And remember, like they didn't have season 2 at first. It got season 2.
Right.
So, you know, there's all of that also to balance with it. So.
There's also a very I think there's something important too about, I can't remember who said it, but about the political moment. When we look at these networks, right, these earlier networks like a Fox, was a WB that's no longer in operation, but all of those kinds of shows, the way that they, and even Oprah, right? The ways in which people are making their bread and butter is through the introduction of black shows, right? And so they are very interested in black frivolity, black comedy, right? But there is something about black oppression that runs a very short course. But it's interesting that this conservative minded group responds in a very different way, right? So the protocol and the precedent has always been to have black shows that brings in the viewers. So anything,
like
you know,
Blackish.
right, but anything about, you know, if you study Nielsen study reports, you find that black TV viewers tend to be a group that's kind of unchanging in terms of their numbers, right? I mean, that they are committed to TV watching and committed to network show watching, and yet they do something very different that I think is connected to the kind of political climate that we're in. So even Oprah, as a black capitalist, right, when she realized that folk were not necessarily as interested in her self-help shows, what did she get? Tyler Perry, because she knows he has a particular kind of black audience and also white support, white financial support and backing. And so all of a sudden you see more black people on Oprah than you've ever seen before on this network. And so here in this very, very particular moment, right, is a kind of walking away from what has been done in the past. And I just find that really interesting in terms of the political moment and how we'll talk about it maybe 20 years later.
I would rather let the next audience go.
I appreciate y'all, what y'all did today. My name is Brother Ron Hurd, We All Be News, Memphis, Tennessee. I like the fact, I'm channeling my inner Maxine Waters, how the show reclaimed the Uncle Tom, celebrate the trickster. Because like Uncle Tom was not a bad word to be called. Uncle Tom was a sign, an unusual aid of black liberation. But now people are calling people coons now instead of Uncle Tom. And I want y'all to speak today. And also you a black exploitation expert. I measured all these shows up, these slave shows to Goodbye Uncle Tom, the director's cut. That was very disturbing when I saw it. It was so traumatic when I saw that. And that's the measuring stick for me. So how does this show compare to Goodbye Uncle Tom? And y'all can tell the people who don't know about that show. And thank y'all so much for y'all passion and intellectual expertise.
So I'm literally, I kept thinking, man, Dingo, why Goodbye Uncle Tom for you?
Because like it was so graphic. It was based on historical documents, primary sources, and the way they showed it was so graphic. It was produced by Italians, outsiders. I don't think anybody here could produce something like that was so traumatic. Think about J. Mary Sims and what happened in New Orleans. I mean, it was so traumatic. I could not look at it, but one time it disturbs me. to this day. The power of moving images and visuals. It's disturbing to talk about it now, I'll be honest with you. But I mean, I just want to get y'all opinion. I mean, you wrote a book about how to use black females as guinea pigs. It was laboratory experiments. We looked at guinea pigs and lab rats.
I mean, so that you're asking like a lot of really important questions in one. So I'll try to, and I think in terms of just blaxploitation as a genre, there are lots of them. The Italians did jobs with really graphic films that also connected our diaspora. So you have Burn, those kinds of films created in the 60s. So you know, it's wide ranging. And they're pulling on a lot of tropes. It's very clear that the directors, the producers, even the writers are also inspired, I think, by that kind of filmmaking, right? Because in the end, they're literally turning around not just gender conventions, but also the kind of racial conventions as well. So Elizabeth Hawks becomes a gun-toting mama, right? Like Big Bad Mamas. You have the fragile, really, she's not even a mulatto, right? But the quadroon Rosalie, who becomes so strong that you saw in the scene, right? She can cut a bullet out of her body, right? The ways in which Ernestine literally becomes an expert at concocting drugs, right? I mean, and narcotics.
And
abortions. Right. And so, I mean, so there are all kinds of things that people are pulling on, but I think for me, what is important is that you have people who are trying to show that slavery was not static, that it was dynamic, that, you know, that those people who you were taught to hate, those people who were, you know, stereotypically called the coons, the Uncle Toms, right? But they're much more complicated. They're not one-dimensional and flat, like how Stephen was.
Right? That's favorite character, Cato.
Cato was really complicated.
With the East Indian woman in London.
Right. He's a complicated character, and I think that's what, you know, grabs you into Underground. Is that you're able to view enslaved people not just as stock characters, but as human beings, right? With all of the kinds of challenges that human beings have. I mean, that's important. I'll stop. I feel like I'm rambling here.
The whiteface episode? Sorry.
Yeah.
That whiteface episode?
Oh, right. Yeah. So let's do this. Again, we could stay here all afternoon, and you're welcome to. So we will be in trouble. I would like to go to the two ladies right here in the middle. If you both want to ask your question, I'm going to work you in. We'll go 1, 2, 3. Ask the questions 1, 2, 3. The panelists will answer what they can, and then we will clap, and it'll be wonderful.
Angela Knight from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I just had a quick question. One scene that really stuck with me was when Rosalie and Cato are together and they're playing husband and wife.
Yes.
And she sits down at the piano and he's afraid that she's gonna really blow their cover, but she is eloquently playing the piano. So my question was about the transference and the interaction between slaves and their masters.
Christina Thomas, Johns Hopkins University. So my question came from when we were talking about the protection of what mothers did to protect their children. When you're talking about Ernestine and how she leads them downstairs, but also Ernestine, that one moment where she kills the other mother, right, to make sure that
her daughter doesn't get caught.
Yeah, but I was wondering if we could go back to season 1, episode 1, where there was this really profound moment for me. Remind me of Margaret Carter, the slave woman, where the mother kills her child. So that was a form of powerful resistance, and I was wondering if you could talk about that as well. Wonderful.
All right. Hello, Mika Denny, MIT and UMass Amherst. I think that we see two different Jameses in the Underground. We see the James who sews in some dirt in his bag, and then we see the James who screams when Rosalie comes to try and get him. So I was just wondering if you can speak a little bit about his transformation and how he understands his position on the Macon plantation and in the Macon household.
Okay, we'll start with Dee and Rita and Jessica.
All right, so I'll try and take one question, and I'll frame it within kind of the abolitionist sphere, particularly with, and I forget the mother's name, but Zeke's wife, who,
Sarah-
yes,
Pearly May?
not Pearly May, she's the
Seraphina.
husband, Seraphina, that's it, thank you,
Seraphina,
Seraphina, who murders her child. Like literally, it seems almost like hours or maybe a few days after he's born. Obviously, I mean, it's a mention to the Margaret Garner case that Toni Morrison popularizes with her novel Beloved. But I think if we think about abolitionist culture in the 19th century, infanticide is one of the biggest themes about how slavery depraves black people, right? So when you're reading abolitionist tracts, abolitionists use this, right? From Harriet Beecher Stowe, I mean, to many of the white abolitionists are saying, slavery dehumanizes and makes black people so brutish that mothers kill their own children, right? And so we now see even how the enslaved community has to reckon with this, because there's never really a discussion about what happens with mothers who commit infanticide within the slave community. And so Underground does something very different. It moves away from the kind of abolitionist reading, white abolitionist reading of infanticide, and it centers it within the black community. And so what she ultimately does is she shows the discord within the slave community. Cato can't stand her. Her husband stops speaking to her, right? Rosalie has no regard, and even the mistress is so filled with disgust about her being a child killer on the plantation that she is sold away. And so you see the inner workings of the political nature of infanticide outside of the realm of just abolition, but within the slave community, which I think was an important kind of demarcation from the way it's always been dealt with historically.
I know there were 3 questions, and I'm forgetting one of them now. So you asked about James.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there was the question about transference. I'm going to leave transference for somebody else.
That's a hard one. Yeah.
That's a really, really tough question. Like I said, one of the things that I found most interesting, going across both seasons of this show was character development in so many different ways. And I think James actually, we kind of don't see him so much until, I think especially in season 2, when he enables his own sister to be captured, right? This woman, this pregnant woman who has come hundreds of miles in order to, free her family, to find her mother, to find her brothers. And she shows up to discover that her mother has been sold off to a deep south plantation. Her older brother is dead, right? And so it leaves James. And I mean, I think it's easy for us to be horrified and shocked by the fact that James, outs his own sister, and as a result of it, she's actually branded, right? And we could talk a lot about marking and branding. But what I think is, it actually, again, I thought it was so brilliantly done in terms of showing us, especially when you see that Rosalie took the lash for him in season 1, right? And this is the sister that he rats out. But isn't this exactly, right, it shows us, if you read the WPA ex-slave narratives, right, as complicated and flawed as they are, we have to use them. It's the largest, database we have of ex-slaves' voices. And many of these folks, when they were interviewed, they're talking about their childhoods.
Right.
And they talk about the fact that they end up being pawns on the plantation, being torn between different family members, white and black. Right, I remember one transcript where the formerly enslaved person talks about the fact that when his father called him and his master called him at the same time, he went to his master. And later in the quarters, his father disciplined him, chastised him, and said, "I am your father. When I call you, you come to me no matter who else is calling you." But you see the constant emotional and physical tug of war that children are in slavery, and we often don't talk about children, and that's one of the things that's been growing. Wilma King certainly has done wonderful work, Marie Jenkins Schwartz as well, but we need actually more work on children and enslavement, because this kind of power play, Susanna takes James into the house in particular to turn him against his family, to make him into her son, and to turn him into the very person that Ernestine and Rosalie would despise. And despite what James does, Rosalie doesn't turn her back on him. He is her brother. She loves him. No, there's a scene where Noah basically says to him, look, you better get it together. Because we family. We kin now. I'm with your sister. She's carrying my child. You know, you basically gave her up, but you're going to have to make a decision now. Which family are you in and whose side are you on? Right. Like he doesn't shy away from talking to this like 7-8-year-old child and saying, you know, basically man up and choose whose side you're on, with this constant, you know, tug of war that children find themselves in. Is this my family? Is that my family? But Miss Susanna's been taking care of me. Miss Susanna sold your mama off and, you know, is trying to hunt down your sister. Yeah, I mean, so that's why I actually really think that James's character is really important, and he's been overlooked in some ways. And I think we need to, but I think that also is part of the fact that children have been overlooked in general in slavery studies, and we need to do more of looking at them and the role that they play on the plantation and in the quarters.
Yeah. Can I redeem? I'm gonna use my prerogative and redeem James just for a second.
Oh yeah.
Can I just add this one little point?
I ain't mad at him.
I'm not mad at him. What is great about James is that moment where he tells Rosalie she is the root of all their problems. He gave her up because he is a child and he can't understand that in doing this she was trying to liberate everyone. What he saw was man, listen. You are the root of all of our problems. And so I understood that child moment. He's a child.
Yeah, he's a child.
He can't
And you're taking away all my good stuff that I have.
Right. So I just wanted to put that in there. That
all my candy and all my toys.
Just to add to the complexity.
Yes.
So Jessica Marie Johnson is the last word. I won't interrupt. I don't think. I don't think.
I mean, I can't really add much to what has already been said. I think thank you for that. I will try and take up the Rosalie and Kata, Rosalie playing the piano, which I think is sort of the heart of your question. And I think it actually fits really well with thinking about James. Because what's great about the character development of Rosalie over the sort of last half of that first season is that we sort of assume at the very beginning, once we know Ernestine and Macon's relationship, that Rosalie is Macon's daughter. But we really see what that means to Rosalie without Rosalie sort of spelling it out necessarily. And one of the things that I think came with that, and it's pause on that. And so then with James, we get to see that in action. Macon is dead at this point, murdered at this point. And Miss Susanna is sort of taking James up as a game, essentially, to terrorize, you know, Ernestine, who's not even there anymore, and now to terrorize Rosalie, who has had to return or has been caught in trying to get James to escape. But even before that, you know, James got to play with Macon's son. James, you know, like they bought him a horse. They bought him a horse. He's not in the field until later on, and then, you know, like still has a sort of interesting relationship with his half brother, essentially. And so there are these things that, as the children of Macon and in whatever relationship they are with Miss Susanna, that James, Sam, and Rosalie get. And for the owners, I mean, in some ways it's a game. In some ways it's a display of power. It's a practice of power and terror. But it's completely believable to me that Rosalie would be able to pick up things. Maybe some writing or reading skills. Maybe being able to play piano. Maybe being able to ride a horse. Sam having his what you call it?
He's a blacksmith.
He's a blacksmith. Yes, thank you. Sam having a skill.
He's an artisan.
Yeah,
right?
none of these I think are removed from their relationship with the owners. And so, you know, I think that's part of. I think what we're seeing with Rosalie playing, just that act of playing the piano and like her ability to perform comfort in a white parlor. I think that is actually part of things that she was able to pick up as part of the game that the owners are playing with that family. But at the same time, these are also things that she could then turn in an act of subterfuge to protect Noah and really to protect Cato in that moment, and to continue to perform what looks like freedom to this to this white man who's you know, kind of sort of interviewing them, seeing if they're okay, if they're legitimately free. Even if that is not what freedom, as we come to find out over the course of the show, it's not the embodiment of freedom. Freedom is family, it's all these other things. But she can play at that, and she can be her own trickster in that kind of moment.
But because it's the education that black folks receive is different from the ones that white folks think they're receiving, right? That they're picking up all kinds of things that white folks aren't intending for them to pick up, and then they can use it back against them.
And then Rosalie uses her other education as a laborer when she tries to help the woman, you know, make the bed and ask the women questions about, you know, oh, do you know where the keys are? Like, do you know where the medicine is? Like, she has a whole sort of enslaved people and a whole, toolbox, of things that they are picking up because they have to survive, and also just picking up like, oh, I never knew this piano would be useful, but I'm gonna play this piano now. Yeah, so there's some of that.
We're going to go to Dr. Owens, who
This will be very,
you are the last word.
Very quick. But I was thinking about transference in a different way, right? Particularly with the name underground, and I keep thinking about inner workings and interior lives, and even the inner workings of the set. That those who are in character development and writing name the central character, male character, Noah, right? And although I am not a biblical scholar at all, but Noah, right, has to build a new ark, essentially, to save civilization. But what happens after the flood, the great flood, is that the curse of Canaan happens. And so we know what that means within slavery studies and racial formation theory, right? So it is very intentional when you name the black man who is essentially charting a way to freedom for these people, Noah, right, who is sent to build a new ark, and everybody left behind has to deal with this curse of Canaan, and we know what the Hamitic myth means. And so for me, that was really interesting to think about what white writers are doing in these rooms as they're transferring these kinds of ideas onto characters as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for wonderful. As always, there's never enough seats, there's not enough time, but we thank you for participating.
If we didn't have to walk to the Hyatt,
You know,
it's in another hotel. That's